So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's very weird starting a webinar. I've never started one, so here we go. Thank you for joining us. This is our fourth webinar in January 2024, and this is webinar called Do I Still Need This Medication? So first thing I wanted to say is I wanted to thank our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage, for allowing us to produce these webinars. And I also would like to thank our partners who are partnering up with us for this webinar, the Canadian Medication Appropriateness and Deprescribing Network. So just to give everyone a quick rundown of how this webinar is going to go today, because I made a mistake yesterday, I did not attach the agenda. I attached the presentation, so tired eyes. But this is going to be a bit more of an informal style, if you will. It's just going to be a chat. So the webinar is set to take place between now and 11:30. So it's about an hour and a half. So the first hour will be the presentation. And then the second half will be a Q&A with Émilie, who's our presenter. And then I will be feeding the questions to Émilie. And then we will end the webinar and we'll include a little survey so you can tell us how we're doing. Now that the housekeeping is done, I want to thank Émilie Bortolussi-Courval for taking the time to join us and have this chat with us this morning. And I also wanted to thank, I think she's here, but Jenny at the Canadian Medication Appropriateness and Deprescribing Network, because she was an amazing support system. And we kind of did a little teamwork here to get this webinar going. And I also want to thank Brendan for being my my partner in crime for this webinar. So Émilie, I'm going to pass it on to you, and you can just tell everyone who you are and a little about the organization. And thank you so much for being here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So hello, everybody. I can't see you all, but I'm so happy to see that there are so many people here today. Wonderful. So my name is Émilie Bortolussi-Courval. I'm a nurse and a PhD candidate at McGill in experimental medicine. And my PhD is focusing on reducing the burden of over-medication among people that are at risk of being over-medicated. I became involved with the Canadian Medication Appropriateness and Deprescribing Network throughout my PhD, and I've done a lot of work and advocacy among older adults for deprescribing, which is a topic that we'll get to today. Today, we're going to be speaking about balancing the harms and benefits of medications, some concrete actions that patients and caregivers can take to make sure that their medication is really helping them, and how to work as a team with healthcare providers to see if deprescribing can work for you or someone you care for. So by the end of my presentation, my goal is that you feel more informed about safe medication use and deprescribing, and more comfortable talking about these issues with your friends, your family, and most importantly, your healthcare provider. This presentation includes general information. I will not be providing any personal health advice, so you should always consult your healthcare provider if you have any questions related to your health or the health of someone you care for. You should not stop any medication before speaking to a healthcare provider. Sorry, I'm going to redo my sentence. You should not stop any medications without speaking to a healthcare provider first. Okay, so that's my big disclosure, which is very important to keep in mind throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So our plan for today, we're going to learn about why does aging make us more sensitive to medications and its effects, and in what situations would the risks of taking medications outweigh the potential harms. And finally, we're going to learn how you as patients, caregivers, and how you can work with your healthcare providers to prevent the harmful effects of medications. Next slide. So the Canadian Medication Appropriateness and Deprescribing Network is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and I don't have any potential conflict of interest or actual conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. I am not making money off of this. I just want to make that very clear. Next slide. So why do we take medications in the first place? Does anyone want to answer the question. So why do we take medications in the first place? Feel free to unmute your mic if you want to for this portion.
I think it'll probably help move things along if either they use the chat or
Okay.
or we just move along.
Yeah, we'll move along. All right. So medications are often necessary to maintain health or to improve symptoms. For example, people can take medications like Tylenol or Advil to help with symptoms of pain or fever. And we also use medications to manage chronic conditions. So as we get older, we're more prone to getting chronic conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, lung problems, arthritis, and the list goes on. Medications are helpful to control these conditions. And one of the main reasons why we want to control these conditions is to prolong the life expectancy and slow down disease progression. Medications can prevent complications of disease and help people live longer. Next slide, please. So again, this big disclosure for this talk, do not stop all your medications after this conference. This is not the goal of the presentation. Do not stop anything because of this presentation. Always, always, always speak to your healthcare provider first before changing or doing anything with your medications, okay? Next slide. So medications have many benefits, but taking too many medications can be risky. Different healthcare providers like pharmacists, physicians, and nurses are increasingly concerned about the harmful effects of medications. I myself was concerned about it as a nurse, which is why I decided to do a PhD on the topic. And one of the top health concerns for older adults in Canada is medication side effects, reported in a phone survey study that was recently done. And we'll explore today why older adults need to be especially careful about their medications and what can be done to minimize risk and maximize the benefits of these medications. Next slide. So think in your mind, I'm going to ask you this question and think of a percentage in your mind, okay? So what percentage of older adults living in the community, so that are age 65 and over, take 5 or more prescription medications? So don't forget, this doesn't include, so no over-the-counter medications. I'm going to give you a moment to reflect on that. Can we click to the answer? So 62% of people age 65 and older take 5 or more different prescription medications. Now think about the next question. What percentage of older adults in the community take 10 or more different prescription medications? Again, don't include over-the-counter medications. I'll give you a moment to reflect. And can we see the answer? So 24%, so a quarter of older adults take at least 10 different prescription medications. And for people over the age of 85, 36% of people take 10 or more medications. So if we think, as people get older, they tend to take more medications. Next slide. So we have given statistics about medication use, but we need to keep in mind that no two individuals are identical. So what works for one older adult might not necessarily apply to another older adult. There are 7.3 million Canadians over the age of 65. It is a growing population, and there are as many unique older adults as there are unique younger people. Older adults are very, very diverse in terms of health, fitness, lifestyle, and the vast majority of older adults live independently in their community. More than half of older adults report being in good health, but 75 to 80% of people live with one or more chronic conditions. 1/4 of older adults in Canada live with frailty. Frailty is a state of health where the person's overall well-being and ability to function independently are reduced, and the person is more vulnerable to health deterioration. So the risk of becoming frail increases with age, but the two are not the same. So it's not because you age that you become frail, okay? The risk increases, but they're not synonymous. Next slide. So why does aging make us more sensitive to the effects of medications? Next slide. So there are several explanations. Life expectancy is longer now than it ever has been. And this is in great part thanks to advancements in medicine, which include medications. But as we get older, we get more and more chronic diseases, and we also tend to take more and more medications to control these illnesses. But taking more medications increases the risk of developing harmful side effects. And as we get older, medications can affect us differently, and the benefits and harms of medications might change. So what was good for you, 20 years ago may no longer be the case today. Next slide. So our body changes as we age, and it's normal. It's not at all wrong. It's not a disease. It's a normal process across the lifespan as we age. So let's take a closer look at that. Our brain becomes more sensitive to drug effects as we age, and this can cause confusion, dizziness, memory issues, or fatigue. And as we get older, our kidney and liver are less efficient at processing medications and removing them from our bodies. This means medications might accumulate in our bodies and cause more side effects. And our body also contains less and less water as we age, and medications can become more concentrated. Medications might also stay longer in our body because we have less muscle and body fat. But again, all this to say, as we get older, the harms of medications can become more pronounced. But it doesn't mean that these changes happening in our body are necessarily bad. This is a normal part of the aging process, and we just need to learn how to adapt to this reality as we age. Next slide. So, some groups are at higher risk of harmful effects of medications than others. So people that are over the age of 65, as we saw in the previous slide, our bodies change with age and harmful medication effects might become more pronounced. Unfortunately, in 2016, 1 in 143 Canadian seniors were hospitalized due to the harmful effects of their medication. We can also look at people with multiple chronic conditions. They also often take multiple medications to manage each disease. But it's, if a patient has an illness that requires multiple medications to treat, the individual medications can interact with each other or interact with the disease. And this might cause unpredictable or harmful effects. Finally, women are more susceptible to the harmful effects of medication because of their physiology and biology. The next slide will tell us why. So, women are more at risk of harmful effects of medications for various reasons. First, they have a longer life expectancy. They suffer from more chronic conditions and are prescribed more medications to take for these conditions compared to men. They take more medications than men, as women tend to consult their doctors more frequently than men do. And the female biology and physiology make them at higher risk of the harmful effects of medications. So, next slide. So I'm going to give you again a moment to reflect on this question. In what situations would the risks of drug effects outweigh their potential benefits? We need to speak about medication overload. Next slide. So the term taking too many medications is called medication overload. And so it's defined as taking a combination of medications that does more harm than good. I really like to think of this as a balance, right? Of harms on one hand and benefits on the other. So we have medication overload when the harms outweigh the benefits. And this can increase the risk of harmful effects of medications like drug interactions, falls, fractures, hospitalizations, memory problems, confusion, and things like this. So scientific research has shown, and this is, a big part of the research I've done in my PhD is demonstrating that the more medications we take, the more likely we are to experience these side effects. Next slide. So for Canadian seniors, most hospitalizations, for example, from injuries are due to falls, like broken bones from, like example, a hip fracture, often occurs due to a fall. Taking more medications can make you more likely to fall. Just taking 4 to 7 medications doubles your risk of falls. Taking 8 or more increases it even more. Next slide. So medications have unpredictable effects when they interact with each other. That's called a drug interaction. Interactions happen when medications have these unpredictable effects, like canceling out the effects of each other or causing harmful consequences. More medications means a higher chance of having these interactions. And medications can also interact with food and diseases. For example, when you're taking 8 to 10 medications, the risk of an interaction increases by 8 times. Next slide. So the vast majority of Canadians take natural health products or over-the-counter medications. More than 3/4 of Canadians report having used at least one complementary or alternative therapy sometime in their lives, based on a Fraser Institute report. Natural health products include vitamin supplements and herbal supplements. Over-the-counter medications can be bought without a doctor's prescription, include, things like Tylenol, Advil, Gravol, things like that. So both natural health products and over-the-counter medications can cause interactions or side effects. A lot of patients might forget to tell their healthcare provider about these medications. So make sure that your healthcare provider is aware of what medications, what supplements, and what over-the-counter medications you take to prevent the harmful effects of medications. Next slide, thank you. So medication overload might also mean we have a higher risk of errors when we take our medications, like forgetting a dose or even doubling the dose. I've seen it happen, a lot as when I'm working at the hospital as a nurse. With the more medications we have, it's just so much to manage, and it can be very difficult to manage all these pills, especially as we age, because we get increasing ones, and then, a whole spectrum of consequences can arise from that. Next slide. So this is the balance I was talking about earlier. So it's not always the sheer number of medications that we're taking. There's some medications that have been shown to carry more risk of a harm in older adults than others. So risky medication is a medication where the potential risks of it outweigh the benefits, or a safer alternative for the same condition is available and it's equally or more effective. Next slide. Sleeping pills are an example of a risky medication where the harms might outweigh the benefits, especially in older adults. Sedatives are prescribed as sleep aids, but on average, they only help people fall asleep about 14 minutes faster than if they didn't take it. By putting your brain to sleep, the medication makes you less alert and increases your risk of falls, fractures, car accidents, and memory problems. Clearly, here, the risks outweigh the benefits. Safer and more effective non-drug alternatives are available. There are medication-free therapies that exist to teach the brain to sleep. Sleeping pills are therefore an excellent example of a risky medication. And, just speaking to the effect of car accidents, when I went to a conference, I think not last summer, the one before, in 2022, in Gothenburg, in Sweden. And they were speaking of sleeping pills and the consequences for older adults. And in Sweden, what they do is they tell older adults, you can either have your sleeping pill or your driver's license, but you can't have both. Because it's really this effect of sedation that impairs your reflexes and can lead to motor vehicle accidents. So sleeping pills here illustrated affect our brain in different ways. They can affect our coordination, our reflexes, our reaction time, our attention span, our planning, and our concentration. You know, these are all very useful and necessary functions of our brain when we're doing everyday tasks and when we're operating heavy machinery and things like this. Next slide. So there is a safe alternative to sleeping pills. It's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI, or sleep therapy. It uses a non-medication approach that helps you get your sleep back. And it's officially recommended as the initial, or in the medical field, what's called the first line treatment of insomnia. So when I have patients coming in the clinic and they say that they can't sleep, my first reaction is not to speak with the doctor to recommend a sleeping pill. My first reaction is to recommend now sleep therapy. All right, next slide. So the main components of sleep hygiene include maintaining a good sleep hygiene. What does that mean? Well, it means avoiding screens and caffeine before sleep. It means ensuring a stimulus control, like using your bedroom only to sleep or for intimacy, and leaving the bedroom when you cannot fall asleep, right? So we want that separation between your bedroom, and you don't want to start associating it with not being able to sleep. Your bedroom is a place of rest. It's, you know, when you can't sleep, it's really best to exit the bedroom and go do something else so your brain doesn't associate your bedroom with your inability to sleep. Sleep restriction is another technique, which means to restrict the sleep time to increase the sleep drive, and then gradually increasing the sleep time. Using relaxation techniques like meditation or breathing exercises, cognitive therapy to address thoughts that make sleeping difficult. And for more information, I highly, highly recommend this website. It's completely free. I'm not being paid to say this. Is mysleepwell.ca. It was developed by Dalhousie University. I actually met them a couple of months ago at a conference. They're brilliant. I absolutely adore their platform for sleep therapy. And there are several success stories. So I highly, highly recommend you go and visit the website if you have the chance. Next slide. So here's another question I'd like you to ponder. How many Canadians over the age of 65 take at least one potentially inappropriate medication? So these are these risky medications that we've been speaking about. I'll leave you a moment to answer. So keep that percentage in mind and let's look what the results say. So 38% of men and 48% of women. So here, women are more likely to be prescribed a risky medication. Why do you think that is? I'll leave you a moment to ponder before I give you the answer. So the answer is because women live longer and tend to consult their doctor more readily than men when they have a health concern. So therefore, they're diagnosed with more chronic conditions and prescribed more medications. People that are age 85 and older are prescribed even more risky medications. All right, next slide. It's prescribing potentially inappropriate medications is very costly to society. The costs include not only paying for these risky medications, but also paying for the healthcare costs and hospitalizations of people that have suffered the harmful medication effects. So in Canada, we spend $419 million a year on risky medications for seniors. We spend $1.4 billion a year in healthcare costs to treat the harmful effects of medications like fainting, falls, fractures, hospitalizations, etc. This is extremely expensive. It's a high cost, not only for the older adults, but for society and for healthcare spending. Next slide. So what can we do to change things? You know, this is like, we're kind of switching here from the theory-based portion of the presentation to the practical, pragmatic, what can I do phase. So we'll discuss how patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals can work together to prevent the harmful effects of medications. Next slide. All right, so deprescribing, which is the topic of my PhD, and I do deprescribing every single second of my day. It's part of the solution to over-medication and risky medications. We can deprescribe medications that may cause more harm than good. So deprescribing means reducing or stopping medications that might not be beneficial or may be causing harm. The goal of deprescribing is to maintain or improve the quality of life. When you're prescribed the medication, there should also be a plan or monitoring to know when the medication should be reevaluated to see if it can be reduced or stopped. This is very, very important. Again, I'm coming back to my disclosure. Deprescribing must always be done as a team with your doctor, nurse, or pharmacist. Never stop it, never deprescribe without speaking to your healthcare professional first, okay? Never do this alone. There is a team of healthcare professionals with you that want to help you on this journey, and you should never do it alone and by yourself, okay? Next slide. So, most older adults are willing to deprescribe medications. In fact, a recent study that was done showed that 71% of older Canadians would be willing to stop a medication if their doctor said it was possible. So the first thing to do is to make a special appointment to see your doctor, your pharmacist, or your nurse specifically to review your medications. This is a great chance to start a conversation about whether all the medications you're taking are right for you. It's also good to discuss whether you might be experiencing side effects, which might not be obvious at first sight. Next slide. So here are some questions that you can ask your doctor, your nurse, or your pharmacist about your medications at your next visit. So many of the Canadian Deprescribing Network resources and brochures have the following 5 questions listed on them. Why am I taking this medication? You might be surprised by some of the answers. Patients who are informed about their medications will find it easier to flag side effects and prevent medication errors like doubling the dose by mistake. Next slide. So what are the potential benefits and harms of this medication? How does your medication improve your health, and what does it do for you? Is it used for prevention? What side effects should you be wary about? This is the time to speak about what's important to you. Patient priorities need to be considered to ensure a shared decision-making process between the patients, their caregivers, and the healthcare providers that are involved. Next question. Can it affect memory or cause me to fall? A lot of patients are unaware that some of their medications can impact their memory or can cause them to fall. This is an extremely important question to ask your healthcare provider. And finally, can I stop or reduce the dose of this medication? Don't be afraid to ask. You will never get an answer if you don't ask the question. And sometimes it is possible, sometimes it's not. But the fact that you ask that question to your healthcare provider shows that you care about your health and you want to be involved, and you also have a say in what medications you take, and you have a say in your health. So never forget to, don't be afraid to ask these questions. And finally, who do I follow up with and when? If a decision was taken to reduce the dose or stop a medication, you might need to be followed more closely during that period. If nothing was changed, then your medication will still need to be evaluated in the future, so it's best to know when that time comes. All right, so next slide. Yes, there are also nurse practitioners, exactly. Thank you. So inform yourself about your medications and why you're taking them. Patients who are informed about their health and treatments can make better decisions. Engage in a discussion with your doctor, your pharmacist, nurse, or nurse practitioner about deprescribing options and alternative therapies. Spread the word about deprescribing. Talk to your friends, your neighbors, your dog's cat. I'm kidding. But tell your government representatives, contact them, reach out to people that you know about. Even your healthcare providers might need to be informed. This is a it should not be a budding field. But thankfully, more and more healthcare providers and government agencies are becoming aware of deprescribing and its benefits for patients. Ask questions, stay informed, be proactive, participate in making informed choices and spreading change. Next slide. So there are resources completely free. Again, I'm not paid to say this. Please check them out. They're wonderful. I give them to my patients all the time. There are resources in French and English, and some are even available in other languages. You can contact the network to know more, but they're deprescribing brochures that you can print out. They are so adorable. And they're very, very useful for patients. This is what the next slide. Thank you. So this is what they look like. This is just a summary. There's a lot more on the website. So we have a little brochure on how to get a good night's sleep. So this is an introduction to the sleep aid that the sleep therapy that I was speaking about before. And we have some little flyers here and specific brochures to different medication classes. We've got some fact sheets as well. These are easily printable, so you can just, hand them out. It's a great Christmas present. I don't know, I'm throwing ideas out there. We also have articles that are free and available to be used in newsletters. Just wonderful, wonderful resources. And we even have a little picture here on the next slide of, I think it was a conference that we were giving to older adults and their caregivers. So feel free to join us in the quest for deprescribing. And I'll take questions.
I couldn't find my unmute. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Brendan.
No, I was going to say, while we're waiting for Katya to get to her questions, I just wanted to let Émilie know that I went to her last slide. So if you want to just talk about how to contact you, and then we'll take the PowerPoint off.
My goodness, of course. Yes. So you can check out the Canadian Medication Appropriateness and Deprescribing Network. Download resources, write to us about your deprescribing experiences. We love, love, love hearing about stories of patients that had medications deprescribed. We're also active on Facebook, on Twitter or X, what's it called? I don't know today, and YouTube. Follow us and go check out the fun work that we're doing. We publish lots of studies. I myself publish research and it's shared on the Caden platforms. So feel free to reach out to us, and you can send us an email here if ever you'd like to reach out for whatever reason. Feel free.
Super. I found my unmute button, so we're good to go. So thank you so much, Émilie. It's a really, really interesting and fascinating topic. So I'm just going to start with a couple of big general questions for you. So you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So it's kind of what we talked about yesterday when we first met, actually, and we were prepping for this webinar. So what makes someone healthy? Because you can have an underlying health condition but still be healthy. So here's a big existential question. What is a healthy human?
Oh my gosh, that is an excellent question. And research has tried to answer the question challengingly. And I think healthy is what each person defines it as. So what's healthy for one person might not be for another, but that's completely okay. Being healthy is what you make of it. And if that for you is, being able to go out and do your groceries and being able to go out for a walk, but for someone else, that might mean running a marathon. But it's a bit ambitious. I would never. But all that to say, it's how you define it. You can live with chronic conditions and have them be well managed, and you can fulfill your life to whatever you would like it to be.
Great answer.
Thank you.
It's so subjective, isn't it? Yeah.
It absolutely is.
So here's another question I have. when did, oh, I have to be really careful how I word this. When did prescribing medication, or medication, become more of the norm than, say, looking at alternative methods of managing health issues, such as, change your diet or exercise more for, to reduce your blood pressure? When did that shift happen? And is the medical world maybe shifting back to a more kind of deprescribing motto?
I think if we look at the prevalence of polypharmacy in the 90s, it was, I'd say 15% of older adults had polypharmacy. So we're taking 5 or more medications. And today it tripled, if not more. So something happened between the 90s and now. I think, especially now we're post-COVID, and we know that COVID it led to an increase in medications prescribed among older adults, especially in long-term care, but also among older adults living in the community. And I think, the healthcare system has fallen apart if it hasn't already, or is falling apart if it hasn't already. And I think there's less and less time for clinicians to spend with patients. And I think that comes at a cost of not having enough time to evaluate non-medication therapies that would be equally, if not more effective than prescribing a medication. Obviously medications do have their raison d'être and their reason to be there. But I think there's a lack of emphasis due to lack of time and pressures on the healthcare system to address non-medication alternatives to illnesses that we have. And I think it's the field of deprescribing is very much in line with sort of going back to our roots, quote unquote, of just finding, time in our day to cook meals, to eat with family, to listen to our body, to be in tune with it, to go exercise because we want to, not because we have to, and because, it's, you have a certain target to reach, it's very, I feel like everybody's lives have become so target-based and so factual and very Cartesian, like very, how do I say, like a checking box, like needing to be checking boxes constantly instead of just, living life and embracing change and embracing time we have on this earth. It's a very philosophical discussion, but I think the field of deprescribing is realizing that by reducing medications, we have to intervene somehow to help with these symptoms that we came to consult for in the first place. So if a medication is more harmful and we deprescribe it, fine, but the underlying issue still needs to be addressed through non-medication alternatives.
Okay, I just wanted to touch and follow up on something you just said, that during COVID, there was if I understood correctly, there was an increase in prescriptions for seniors, both in the community and in long-term care.
Yeah, so there was a study done in long-term care in Ontario. Actually, it was a before and during study. It was supposed to be before and after, but or was it an after COVID when they did the study? And they looked at the rates of prescribing medications among older adults living in a long-term care home in Ontario. And the rates of prescription of sedative medications, so we're thinking, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, I think antidepressants in there, the rates all increased during COVID compared to before. And can we attribute this to the fact that older adults were
isolated,
were imprisoned in their rooms. And, if any reasonable, normal person locked in their room for hours in a day would become agitated and frustrated and wanting to get out, but that doesn't mean that they should be prescribed harmful medications like antipsychotics and benzodiazepines and things like this to sort of control and sedate them. It's a chemical restraint essentially. And I know, during COVID, a lot of people got very, very sick. So that also comes at a cost of having to prescribe medications for illnesses arising during the pandemic. So generally, yes, there was a tendency of an increase in prescription of medications.
Okay. I'm going to segue to something else because I could talk about this for another half hour, but it's not the theme of the webinar. So I just wanted to touch a bit more on the idea that how can someone get their team, be it a nurse practitioner who can, if you have one, which good for you if you do, if you have a nurse practitioner who can consult with your doctor, or your team, be it your pharmacist, your nurse, or your caregiver, how can you kind of get everyone, I don't want to use the word mobilize, but get everyone on board to start the conversation just to see, how can one go about that?
Yeah, so I think, especially in the healthcare system, especially in Quebec right now, is very difficult to access. It's difficult to access a healthcare provider, period. And in my has this been supported by research? Not really, but I'm going to suggest something that I think is how I would do it if I were to engage in a deprescribing process. I think the first step is to contact your pharmacist. They're the most accessible. And I wouldn't make an appointment. I don't know if you can make an appointment, but I feel like for something like this, you probably should call at least in advance to say that you'd like to discuss this with your pharmacist. Because I like to think of them as sort of, they're on the receiving end of all the specialists that prescribe things, they're all faxed to that pharmacy because yes, we're still faxing things and we're still sending things on dinosaurs. And so I think your pharmacist knows all the medications. They are the medication expert. After that, I think the more generalist practitioners like family doctors, nurse practitioners would be the next step after speaking to the pharmacist to do a medication review, because then they have the broadest understanding of their medical conditions and then can collaborate with the pharmacist to adjust medications. And the pharmacist is very able also to send a report to the family doctor with their thoughts and their recommendations for prescribing or deprescribing certain medications. So I think that would be my go-to. And I know I'm not sure for how many older adults don't have access to a family doctor or a nurse practitioner. So in that case, I would highly recommend speaking to a pharmacist first, and then they could potentially direct you to appropriate resources that can prescribe more liberally.
Okay. What about for loved ones who are taking care of an older senior and maybe they're a bit more concerned or maybe just want to reevaluate the medications? Is it the same steps for them as the individual?
Right. I think it would be the same steps, and if it's possible to go together. But again, if they're like, if the caretaker is the one that has the most knowledge over the health of the person they're caring for, then I think, they can bring the person if they're not able to, because, there's mobility issues. And I think that would be, completely understandable. But I think, the first step would, again, to go see the pharmacist and then make an appointment with their healthcare provider, their physician or nurse practitioner. So family doctor. I would avoid, consulting specialists, unless it's like an internal medicine physician or something like that you see kind of on a regular basis. Because generalists are the ones that have the broadest understanding of the patient's health.
Okay. A question came in the chat, which I think you can answer. So I'm going to throw it there. Can you name some of the medications that have been studied that can be safely deprescribed?
Yes, I can, and I will.
Okay.
On the one condition that no one stops their medications after I list them, because that's not good, and that's not, do not do that. So the following medications, Docusate or Colace is a laxative that is no more effective than placebo. I do not like Docusate. I do not prescribe it. I do not Docusate, number one. Number two, we have sleeping pills, obviously. So in sleeping pills, we can think of trazodone, we can think of lorazepam, so like Ativan, Zolpidem, it's a Z drug, alprazolam. I know the generic names. I don't know the name brands. I'm really bad with that. It's like a thing that my brain just doesn't stick to them.
You're good. Or maybe if you just, instead of like naming the actual medication, maybe exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. That will simplify your life, I think, because I can see the Rolodex going in your brain.
So we have benzodiazepines, antipsychotics. We have, a big one is proton pump inhibitors like Pantoloc or Dexilant, or Dexilant, I think is pronounced. These are proton pump inhibitors, so like they coat the stomach, right? So to not have reflux. And the Deprescribing Network actually has a fantastic brochure on the topic of proton pump inhibitors. I highly recommend to go read it. But essentially, when taken long term, and it can increase the risk of developing bowel infections. So which are very difficult to treat because the bacteria are becoming very resistant. So yeah, those are the types of medications that can be deprescribed. There are tons of others, but briefly, those are some.
No, that's great. Great question just came in. I had it here in my notes, so thank you. Thank you to the person who just sent this in. Can deprescribing be compared to the same as waning off medication?
Yes. It's a form of deprescribing. You know, I think for every medication that you're prescribed, I think physicians need to know they need to know as much how to prescribe as they should how to deprescribe. And I think weaning off a medication is a form of deprescribing because it no longer serves you or it's no longer needed. But deprescribing can also include just stopping a medication. Some need to be weaned off and some can just be stopped. Like Docusate or the Colace, you know, that doesn't really work. You can just stop it, no problem. After having spoken to your healthcare provider naturally, because, you know, don't do this on your own. But it can just be stopped like that because there are no consequences to just stopping it from one day to the next. But yes, it's a form of deprescribing.
Okay. And then another question came in where the group asks, where can you find information on what medications are and what they can do? But not WebMD, but like legit info.
Pharmacist, the best resource. And they can print out, what do you call it?
Like the information sheet.
Information sheets in a very, very accessible language. And then if you have any questions and if it's not clear or something like this from the information, then you can always ask the pharmacist.
Amazing. Okay, I have a bit of a tricky question, but I'm going to ask it. Because in the presentation, you said women are more at risk for medication. Now, this is a bit of a radical question. Could that be linked to, and I could be wrong here, that in trial experiments, medications are tested more on men than on women? And is that maybe why there's no kind of data on how women's bodies take medication?
But then why would they, I'm sorry, so your question is why are they prescribed more medications?
Yeah, so why are women more at risk with certain medications versus men?
They're more at risk of adverse drug events. It's because simply because it's like women are have a higher tendency of storing more fat in their bodies because of their physiology, which is just like completely normal. But so certain medications can accumulate in adipose or fat cells. So if a woman has more fat cells, the medication can accumulate in the body and then have a higher risk of adverse drug events compared to men.
Okay, so when a medication is trialed, they're men and women they're tested on both men and women.
Generally, yes, but I mean,
Okay.
the side effects of medications are purely physiological. Like it's not because trials, didn't study them on men that doesn't really have a link. It's more so of the way that that women are
Breaks it down.
physiologically built than compared to men.
Okay, perfect. Question just came in. Is there also some information on medications that have been studied with a view to deprescribing available on the your old name is describing the Deprescribing Network website?
Some information on medications that have been studied. Yes. Yes, the deprescribing brochures are
It's the brochures, right? Like all the information should be in those brochures that are on the website. Perfect. And I think I'll ask one more question. I had a feeling we were going to end around 11, but that's okay. You said in the presentation, Émilie, that people 85 and over who get prescribed, they get prescribed more, okay, words, use them. People 85 and over get prescribed riskier medication than younger seniors. Why is that? Is that just because there's more complex medical issues or?
Yeah, so they're the conditions in patients that are over the age of 85 can be different compared to those that are over the age of 65 but under the age of 85. There's a lot of issues with sleep in older adults over the age of 85. So oftentimes, give a sleeping pill, but no, they're bad, There's also, I imagine it's related to, the aging process potentially being being less active, the risk of frailty, as I spoke to before, frailty or aging increases the risk of frailty, although they're not synonymous. Being frail is a syndrome that affects more patients over the age of 85 than those under that cutoff. And then, frailty just entails a whole cascade of medications that can be prescribed that can be potentially harmful and exacerbate and make the frailty worse. I think there's another question.
Yeah, it just came in. So great question. Thank you, Learning Center. If you're under 50 and you're taking many medications, or we'll just say medications, is it better to talk with your pharmacist or your doctor about deprescribing?
I'd say keep the same steps just because the access to a healthcare provider is difficult for patients of any age. So start with the pharmacist, and then depending on what they say, then, if you can always make an appointment with your physician if you have one. So yeah, but the pharmacist is the expert in medications, and I would highly recommend to go speak to them.
So speak to your local pharmacist.
Yes.
Tip of the day. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So thank you so much, Émilie. I think we're gonna wind down. We're experimenting with these 4 sets of webinars that we're starting today. Today's the first one. So they're going to be a little bit shorter, which is exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to thank you so much. This was great.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. This was so enjoyable. I thoroughly enjoyed my time.
Well, maybe we'll have to have you back at some point.
Absolutely.
Done. Okay. So what I wanted to do right now is I'm multitasking here. I'm just going to put the link to our website where you can find out about our upcoming webinars in February and March. So let me make sure I can copy paste. Here we go. Well done, me. And then the other link I'm going to put in is if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so. And you can get all the information on upcoming webinars and everything we're doing here at Seniors Action Quebec. So there's a second link.
I've also posted the link to the survey.
Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, it's right there. I see it. So please fill out the survey if you have a second. It's really important for us just to make sure we're doing okay, and we can just have some stats on our end so we can do our reporting and our housekeeping with our funders. So the survey is in the SurveyMonkey link. And we will be sending the link to this recording in about a week or so, give or take. So we'll be sending that out with Émilie. If we want to share the presentation, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, great. So we'll include the link to the presentation. Should have asked that before, sorry. Brain was a bit early for me. So we'll include all of that in there. And I think I can wrap this up. 10:58, not bad.
Amazing.
Right?
Brilliant.
So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for tuning in on a Tuesday morning to learn about deprescribing. And we'll see you. Our next webinar is February the 6th, I believe. So on the Tuesday at, I'm going to say 10. I'm going to say 10. So hopefully you can join us there. We'll be learning about adult literacy in Quebec's English-speaking senior population. So there we go. So thanks again, everyone. Merci beaucoup, Émilie. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brendan.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.